Well, hello and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast. We are so glad that you are joining us today as we continue to hear from such a wide range of global and Australian leaders when it comes to multiplication, church planting, and the different ways that the Lord is inviting us as Australian church leaders and church planters to bring about a multiplication and advancing of the kingdom in Australia. And today we are so delighted to be joined by a very recognizable Australian church leader in the form of Pastor Mark Varughese. Mark and his wife Jemima planted Kingdomcity in 2006 and have become quite an incredible story of the way that the Lord is using them both in Australia, but also around the world now in 5 different continents. Mark, it's such a joy to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you, Charlie. It's a privilege to be here. And it's my honor to share the little that I've got, and hopefully it blesses everybody.
Amazing. Well, it's clearly been a wild ride for you and Jemima as you have planted and led a global church over the last almost 20 years. I wonder, before we particularly jump into the story of Kingdomcity, you would tell some of your own personal story, how you came to know the Lord, how you met Jemima, your family. We'd love to hear some of your journey.
Absolutely. Well, my background in a nutshell, I'm born in Singapore, grew up in Malaysia, Indian origin, but Australian citizen. So I sort of grew up with a cultural complexity, I guess. Not sure whether I was Aussie or Asian. I was too Aussie to be Asian and too Asian to be Aussie. And but I grew up in a conservative family, a Christian background. But it wasn't till we came to Australia and I was at the age of 10 when I heard a pastor talk about God in a way that was so foreign to my concept. And I didn't know God was intimate and involved in people's lives. And that set off a desire in me to know him. I had no real desire to do what I'm doing today. My family all come from sort of professional backgrounds. They're doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, that sort of vibe. Everybody goes to uni. I've got 40 first cousins and they're all professional. Like, it's that sort of vibe. So I was a lawyer for 5 years. I've studied law and commerce. To end up doing what I'm doing was a pretty significant deviation. I'm the first on my family on either side to do that. And obviously the journey's been an incredibly wild ride, as you said. So my complexity in terms of culture, was actually back as I was growing up, I thought it was dysfunctional. But it turned out to be divine preparation because now with our church in different cities and cultures, that almost has prepared me to relate to a broader spectrum of people. And Jemima's the same. Jemima's born in New Zealand, grew up in the Philippines, sounds like an American. She's half Aussie, half Kiwi with a slice of Turkish. And so she too had her own challenges of, third culture kid and all that stuff. So when we got married, and she joined me on the journey a year into the Kingdomcity journey. It was almost a further expansion of the potential reach because of the exposure she had had to different cultures. So, it's amazing how God uses everything about your life if you surrender it to him. And so we've got 2 sons, Zeke and Caleb. Zeke is 15. Caleb is 11. They're both great boys, and we have our tensions. They fight like normal brothers do. But by God's grace, everything is going relatively well. So much to be grateful for, and we're very thankful.
Amazing, Mark. Well, with that backdrop, of course, we've alluded to the wild ride that has been Kingdomcity for you guys as you've planted and led what even from its origins has been a global church. I wonder, for those who maybe have heard of Kingdomcity, maybe for those who are newer to the story of Kingdomcity, you would give us a bit of a first-hand account of what the Lord did in you as you planted and have grown and multiplied that church all around the globe, and even some of the kind of key milestones along the way.
Sure. So as you said earlier, we started in 2006. April 2006, 9 April 2006 was our first service. I was living in Perth, Australia at the time before that. And what happened is I probably got to the point where I thought, I'm not sure what the rest of my life's going to look like. And I probably was internally myself in not a great space. But then I had an encounter with the Lord, which I call my burning bush, in the sense of it was a personal encounter for me of redirection. And very clearly the Lord spoke and said, go to Malaysia and plant a church. And I remember thinking, that's crazy, because I am an Australian citizen. My parents worked hard to move us out of Malaysia, and they worked hard to educate me so I could become a lawyer. And I now had reversed both steps of progress. And now I quit law in ministry, and then I'm going to quit Australia, go to Malaysia. But it was the Lord, and it was so clear. And I remember feeling the support of my parents and people at the time. I was 30 at the time. So I sold my house, bought a one-way ticket, went to this Islamic country without a visa, to start a church. And I had no clue where to start. Like, I knew a few people. I had a few aunties and relatives that lived there because, my dad's side's from there. So I stayed with one of them, just bunked in. And I met a guy, his name's Jai, and he was sort of the first follower. And the first follower is a big deal. Like, most leaders are crazy, but the first person to follow a crazy leader, that's the one that gets the attention of others. And they're like, what's going on here? Why is this? Like, we knew he was nuts, but what's this sensible guy doing following him? So I'm saying I'm starting a church. I don't know if I was going to live there. I don't know how I was going to stay there. I didn't know how I could earn income there. But that's what we started. We started in Starbucks because it had free Wi-Fi. And then we planned meetings there. And eventually I said, why don't we gather in someone's house? And we did. And I said, invite anyone who looks lost or looking like they need an adventure or a journey. And about 12 people turned up. We've got 2 terrible pictures that mark that first occasion because we didn't think it would be this today.
Wow.
But we got these 2 pictures of a handful of people that gathered who just came because what I said to them was, I said to Jai, I said, just tell them I'll buy them noodles. Just come, I'll share my story and buy them noodles. So these guys, 12 people came looking for noodles. And, I'm like, hi, everyone, my name's Mark. And, we're sitting in a circle and I'm sharing my story. And they're just looking at me like, where's the noodles? I'm thinking, you're going to have to hear my story before I give you the noodles. And that's what happened. So I just shared who I am and what I'm doing. And they're like, I said, one day, we're going to have a church. I'm still in the afterglow of this encounter I had with God.
Yeah.
And I said, we're going to have a church. Maybe it's going to be 100 people. And they're all looking at me like, there's 12 of us here. And we don't know each other. We're not sure we're ever coming back. And we just want the noodles. And I remember thinking, that is where it all started. Like literally from a little humble beginning in KL. 2.5 years later, after the church is starting to grow, we get a call from the church I left in Perth. Senior pastor was moving to Melbourne, and the board and everybody felt that Jemima and I should take the church. And I remember thinking, no, I had a burning bush to move to Malaysia. I need more than a phone call or a job offer to come back.
Yeah.
And yet, remarkably, we prayed and fasted, and long story short, we felt it was the right thing to do. And so that began a new season. That was a milestone moment. If you think milestone, there's the start in 2006. There's taken on Perth and KL, and that was before multi-site was that common.
Yeah.
And really, I'm thinking, what does it mean to lead a church in 2 different countries? And it's not like they were big churches. Like KL had about 300, Perth had about 300, and I'm sort of same time zone, so that helps in terms of geography. But we started for the next 7 years living between 2 countries. So that was a big shift. And that's a whole other chapter and a whole other story. I don't know how boring detail you want on that, but we did that for a while. And then when that started to feel exhausting, we set up what today is now known as Kingdomcity International Global, which is really, we needed a sort of a parent company we needed a governing body, I guess, to oversee this because you can't serve 2 masters. You love one and hate the other.
Yes.
And really we started to feel like a rope in a tug of war because you got Perth guys wanting you to stay, KL guys wanting you to stay. What was shocking for me, if I'm really honest, is that both grew despite the fact we were only there for 6 months each. And, which is not normal. And yet I think that's what happened. You look at it and go, wow, there's maybe it grew because we were away. I don't know, but it grew. And people say, wow, you're so empowering. I don't think I had a choice. So the churches grew, and Kingdomcity, at that point, I didn't have any vision beyond Perth and KL. We had 1 location in each. But something happened when we got all the leaders together. I think it's a Psalm 133 moment, brethren dwell in unity. There was this something about one accord, one place, Acts 2. I don't know how to frame it, except something catalytic happened.
Yes.
And I think that milestone in 2013 September was a huge part of what happened. And after that, every year we started new countries: Cambodia in 14, Singapore 15, Botswana 16, Indonesia, da, da, da. And so today here we are, 17 and a half, almost 18 years in. We're in 16 different countries. We're seeing there's 35 locations around the world and about 45 to 46,000 people who call Kingdomcity home. So yeah, it's quite a story, and we're still planting. We still are celebrating the ones that go from 10 to 20 and 40 to 50. So while it looks like we're this big mega church, whatever, we're not really. We're a movement, and we have large congregations, we have middle-sized congregations, and we have very small ones too. And hopefully we're on the journey of more.
Yes. Mark, that's quite remarkable, and for our listeners to hear that firsthand and to actually kind of begin to hear, I think sometimes we can become overawed, and of course that is vision, that is faith. When we hear retrospectively your story and the way that the Lord has used you in multiple countries and the different ways that Kingdomcity was birthed, and of course in listing all those different countries that you guys now have a presence in, you would have a very sophisticated understanding of, I guess, global trends and the ways that the church is growing in certain parts of the world. You're a highly sought after speaker and author. I wonder, from your experiences, and particularly as you've been able to lead and grow Kingdomcity, what have been some of the key ingredients that you have been able to, I guess, become passionate about, your values, the things that have been integral into the kingdom coming, and the ways that you have been planting and renewing churches all across the earth?
Wow, that's a great question. I think one of the things I've loved is seeing how the kingdom of God works, almost the R&D part of the kingdom, meaning, okay, this works in Australia. How does this work in Malaysia? How does it work in Africa? How does it work in Europe? How does it work in the Middle East? How does it work in developing countries where they don't speak English? So I certainly am not the expert on any of those things, but I've loved the exploration and the energy around bringing the reality of God to totally different contexts. And like I gave you context with our cultural dysfunction or diversity, I think there's something about it clearly that I enjoy. So there's that edge, which I love. But in terms of, things we've learned along the way, I think keeping it simple is a big deal. I think we live in a very complicated world. I mean, even our church movement has complications because of the diversity of cities and nations and cultures. However, it's in the presence of that diversity that it's even more important that we keep the message, keep the kingdom, keep simplicity around what we do. It forces me, in fact, the travel and the diversity forces me to strain out all the unique excesses that normally come with churches and church planting and culture and go, because if it's kingdom, it should work. It should work in a village in Africa. It should work in first world country. It should work in every setting. Now, contextually, it'll look different. How people walk it out might look different, but the values, the atmospheres of the kingdom and the kingdom of heaven, because, he didn't come with a Vietnam Bible and an Australian Bible and a South African Bible and a, Spanish Bible. It's one word, one God who transcends time, tongue, tribe, everything. So really it's our job to try and not over-culturalize the word and the message in the genuine pursuit of always trying to make it so relevant. Of course you've got to make it relevant. Of course you've got to contextualize it. But I think I tell our staff regularly, we're Kingdomcity, not city kingdom. Meaning we're meant to bring the king and his kingdom to the city. So yes, learn about your city, but some of them get so enamored by the city and they glorify the uniquenesses of their location to make it so out of the realm of what basically God said, just go and make disciples. I think part of the simplification of it for me has been a return to what I'd say we always said in theory, but we didn't do in practice. And that is to emphasize discipleship at its core. Now, many books have been written. People far smarter than me have got much better things to say. But all I had to do is distill, okay, what does this mean for us? How can we organically define it? And how can we quantify it, if it's even possible? And really, there's a lot around that we could unpack if there was interest. But I think that has been a huge marker. And that's almost define the parameters around what we do, how we do what we do. Clearly, there's expansion going on, so it's not like some internal thing, but it is very much the goal. And I think I'm driven by and COVID did that to some degree. It sort of forced us to look under the hood when the gatherings were cancelled around the world and go, well, what is it that he actually wants? And the best way I can describe it is like this. If you and I went to a restaurant and you ordered a ribeye, medium rare ribeye, you know exactly what you want, and the waiter came out and he just brought out a mushroom risotto, you wouldn't argue with him. You just say, look, I'm so sorry, that's not what I ordered. You know, that must be for another table. And if the waiter, to your shock, says, no, Charlie, I know you ordered the ribeye, but this is a really good dish. I just thought you'd like it. You're like, I'm sure it is, but I didn't order it. Oh, yeah, but it's my grandma's recipe. I'm sure it is, but I didn't order it. No, the chef made it with all their heart. Yeah, no, thank you. But I didn't order this. You wouldn't even engage with it because you didn't order that. And I don't want to get to the end of my life and give the Lord something he didn't order.
It's very good.
He said, go into all the world and cook for me, develop disciples. Yeah. That's what he said. I don't want to come to him and go, but Lord, I did this with all my heart and you don't understand. This is really good. You should check out my conferences and my church planning and my this and my that. Okay, all of that's wonderful, but did you bring me any disciples? Because that's what I ordered. So I asked you to make me some disciples. So I figured, as simplistic as that sounds, it was a great starting point to go back to what this is really all about and really run the audit across everything we do. And again, we're not crazy legalistic about it, but we want to make sure we're at least giving him what he ordered. So yeah, there's a big part of it.
Very good, Mark. And I guess what then that causes me to think about and want to ask for you guys as you went on that audit and kind of that soul search of what are the things that you're going to measure at Kingdom City. Can I ask you to take it a step further? And these things aren't simplistic, they are simple. But I wonder if you could take it a step further and help us understand what are the things that Kingdom City is measuring and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, great question. Okay, at the expense of boring people who are not interested in this, I'll tell you what we have learned. I think a lot of people look at church and just look at the size of a church as if that's the ultimate determinant of its strength. But one of the things that I'm really committed to is making sure that we build a strong church, not just a large one. Mm. You know, if I said 150 kilos, that doesn't tell you anything. That could be a really strong 6'4" bodybuilder. Yeah. Or it could be someone who's really obese and genuinely has got major health concerns. So the size alone doesn't tell you everything. It doesn't tell you strength. I think you can take down a large person with one punch, but it's very hard to take down a strong person with one punch. And I think the enemy can take down large ministries with one punch. They can't take down strong ministries. So the question becomes, how do we make sure we're strong, not just large? And then that becomes a delving into, okay, well, we've got to have metrics more than just the size of the church. And traditionally, most pastors will look at the size of the church, the givings, a few things like that. And again, it's nothing probably so earth-shattering. Most people would place values on things like small groups. In a nutshell, our 5 are probably no different to anyone else. But I guess we've attached guidelines, percentages, goals to this to measure what they really mean. So the database is important because that's the size of the church. The weekend attendance is important. That's the engagement of the church. The number of connect groups is important because that's the capacity of the church in reality. Yeah. The connect attendance is important because that's the connectivity of the church. And the volunteers, or we call them carriers, is important because that's the strength of the church. And again, none of that's brand new, but I think looking to make sure we connect it to the why and what we're trying to achieve, whether we're in Hong Kong, whether we're in Mexico, whether we're in London, or whether we're in Singapore. That's the fun part. And also working out, we're not just recruiting people to programs or to serving. We're actually trying to walk them through life, coach them through challenge. But I guess if you start with the premise that someone who comes to church once a month, better than someone who doesn't come at all. Yes. Someone who comes every week is better than someone who comes once a month, generally speaking, all things equal. Someone who comes to church and is connected, committed, accountable in a small group is generally going to be better than someone who just comes and it's not. someone who comes every week, is in a small group and is engaged, is functioning, is serving in some capacity, is probably in all likelihood going to be more along the path of discipleship than someone who's not. So it's not a fail-proof system. I mean, if Jesus had a Judas and his 12, we're all going to have stories of where this doesn't work. But
yes.
Nonetheless, I think we've seen more good than bad happen, and we're always tweaking, we're always learning, and that's some sort of insight into that. The most important thing about those metrics is they trigger conversations I can have with the pastors. And not because they haven't met goals or targets. It's not really about that. It's more about, hey, what's really going on in what you're leading? And again, there's examples I could pull from each of those and what they really mean. But we've looked at it. We've tried to make sure it really is anchored and aligned to the way Jesus did it. So whether it's our vision statement, our values, our atmospheres, or even our systems. Methods change, wineskins change, technology has changed the game. But whatever we're doing, we just want to make sure at the end of it, it looks like we're making some disciples.
That's great. That comment that you made, Mark, about being strong or being a strong church, like that analogy of a bodybuilder or someone who's perceptibly overweight. We've had this conversation offline, particularly for yourself as a church leader of a church, of a large mega church by global standards, or what you would describe as a movement. There's also this tension that we sometimes walk when we talk about multiplication and church planting, and actually what is going to be effective. Like, are we going to set these lofty, high-end targets that we may never reach? Is that good stewardship of God's resources? And you had some fascinating insights just about even the way that we are wanting to plant strong churches or strong campuses. They're going to be able to advance the kingdom in their respective areas. I wonder if you'd shed some light on some of your thoughts that you've got in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I do think it is very diverse. I remember one day going for a swim. I'm probably 6-7 years into this journey. And at that point, we had just had Perth and KL. And my prayer, honestly, was as simple as this: Jesus, help me not to stuff this up. Like, I don't know, what do you think, Lord, when you look at the church globally? Like, there's big church, small church, there's, Anglicans, Presbyterians, Pentecostals, Charismatics. We're fighting over all sorts of things. We can't agree on anything. I can see why you prayed, let them be one. But Lord, what's your report card? I mean, I know Revelations 2, there's a few report cards on churches. But what do you think about all this, Lord? And, I was almost more with a true heart, trying to be noble enough to say, God, I don't want to build something. Again, it's from the same concept. I don't want to go down a road that you're going to look and go, what's that? Like, if you've got something unique in particular, tell me. And the Lord shared with me, I think, in my heart that day, something that has genuinely not just set me free, but it's helped shape my perspective in a way that helps me encourage other pastors and other visionaries and other multipliers and anybody else who's doing anything for the Lord.
Yes.
And the illustration in the image is this. Imagine if you invented the concept of food, the concept. Your whole goal was to feed the planet. You just say, go feed people, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. There'll be a Ray Kroc who can turn something into a franchise and, turn it into McDonald's. And there'll be someone else who just makes ethnic food, or some make local food. Some will have regional influence. Some will have global influence. Some will just bake a cake for their neighbor. But at the end of the day, whether it's a very small thing, a very large thing, all you care about, if you're the inventor of feeding people, is that people get fed. They will fight with each other. They will compare with each other. They will start comparing and competing and criticizing and saying, well, that's not really right. They'll even compare calories and do all of that stuff. But all you care about is, hey, go and feed people. And I think what that did, it was like the Lord was saying to me, do what's in your heart, son. Yeah. I'm like, no, Lord, but what's in my heart is what's in your heart. What's in your heart? No, do what's in your heart. Yeah, I know. What's in my heart is what's in your heart. And there's this idea that everyone who says yes to God has a different fingerprint and maybe a different influence. And yet I think it encouraged me to encourage others to give birth to what's in their heart. He didn't say mega church, small church mindset. He didn't say micro church, macro church. He didn't say, denominationalism, movement, multi-site. He didn't say any of that. He just said, go and make disciples. So yes. I don't mean that we don't have a value around why we do what we do. I think, to answer your question specifically, I think our unique grace, and this is my heart anyway, for what it's worth, is to plant locations that will survive generations. And what I mean by that, it looks like I'd rather have 100 strong churches before I go home to be with Jesus that have land, have legacy, have strong governance, that have the impact and the ability to influence that local community more than, say, 10,000 churches, and really it could be 3 people under a tree as a connect group and that's a church. I'm not saying that's wrong. I just want to build something that we can hand on to someone else that they can then run. My job is to scatter seed and they can turn it into an orchard in the years to come. And I think for me, that's what's sort of guiding the way we do it. So what does that mean? It means that we want to plant stronger churches, and I'd rather plant out of strength as well. And yes, we could scatter, and there are moments where God disperses stuff for the expansion of the kingdom. I 100% believe that. But I think the food analogy set me free from thinking there was only one way to do it. Yeah. And yet, if you ask me, hand on heart, what's our way? I think that's sort of the legacy. And it's not about buildings, but it's about presence enough that continues to multiply, that continues to grow beyond one generation.
So good, Mark. And that is so much the heart of Exponential, is how can we see the whole body in the way that the Lord is calling them to multiply in the ways that they are being called. And you guys have just become a phenomenal global and Australian example of that, which I think is inspiring many. And I guess our final question for today for you, Mark, is I get the sense that so much of your journey when it comes to following Jesus, ministry, planting and church leading comes back to this idea of faith and the rich heritage and legacy of faith that you do have, both from your family, your movement, apostolic fathers and mothers around you. And I wanted particularly to finish off today whether you would speak to the importance of faith and the apostolic vigor that the church in Australia is going to need if it's going to do all that the Lord is calling it in the way that we want to see the fulfillment of the Great Commission in our nation, in the nations. And of course, we want to do that in ways that's healthy, in step with the Spirit, honoring Jesus. But there is this apostolic vigor and faith that is going to be required no matter what level of kind of church planting or leadership you may be serving the Lord in.
No, that's so true. That's so true. I think if you look at what the Lord is doing, it's less about a model and more about a wine and wineskin. And I think there is an absolute return to apostolic connection and relationships. And it doesn't mean you can't plant a single-site church and be autonomous to do that. In fact, we need them. But I think what it is because it's all his bride. You know, Jesus is monogamous. He doesn't have multiple brides. He's going to come back and one day call it his bride. Yeah, so he's going to singularize what so many of us are pluralizing. And so I think something about apostolic grace, it doesn't mean there's one you should follow or, but there's many. But I think if you're a pastor out there on your own struggling, especially in today's world with the kind of investigation and the holes people are throwing stones at governance and all of the stuff that's happening as things begin to implode, we really need to make sure that we do stuff together. Yeah. That's not to remove autonomy. That's not to remove independent thought and the ability to express yourself. But I think a real apostolic leader wants to release what's in people anyway. Yeah, and I think that's the distinction between that and just someone who just, I need a lot of people to do my bidding. And again, how that works out in terms of each church and their modeling is fine, but just don't do it alone. I think that there's a key there. And I think God in his wisdom is slowly allowing even the persecution and the prosecution and the challenges around church. If we're not careful, we'll give into all of that and go, look, see, nothing's safe when it's big. We all need to decentralize. Decentralize if you want, but make sure you stay connected, because the whole principle of apostolic, as you call it, vigor, is that there is some sort of covering, there is some sort of grace. And I don't appoint myself anything. I don't think myself of anything that, outstanding, or I don't need that. But I do feel that we are better together than alone. Yeah. Alone you can do, there's an old African proverb, alone you can go fast, but together we can go faster. Further, I beg your pardon. Together we can go further. And I think there's something about that that is just inherently biblical. 2 or 3 gather, 2 or 3 agree. And in a church modeling sense, it's worth exploring. And even if you are a single-site church in a remote part and you don't have to belong to a multi-site, or you don't have to belong to that, but make sure you remain connected, because we're all part of the same body. I even tell our pastors all around the world that even if you're in a remote country, and yes, you're part of Kingdomcity, yes, you're part of what God is doing at a global level, connect with the body on the ground. Like in your country, connect. Like you don't have to, I know there's different challenges with each one, but just connect, because wherever you find a believer, you found family. And that's the way God designed it. So I think something about apostolic grace has to connect back to the concept of fathering, has to concept to the concept of family. And I think that's what the Lord is doing. Like no matter what the model is, no matter what the style of church planting is or multiplication, there is very much a return to stay connected. We're better together. We're stronger together. 1 puts 1,000, 2 puts 10,000, and to flight. And I think that is the heart of the Father. I think that is what's happening. I don't think the fall away or some of the churches that are splitting is dividing the church. I think it's identifying the church, and what's left needs to really rally together. And we don't need to be one in brand or name, but we need to be one in heart, because we have the same Father. And I think that's what apostolic fathers around the world I think starting to do more and more. That's my experience anyway.
That's amazing, Mark. Well, hey, we absolutely honour and appreciate the time that you've given us today, the journey that you are on in leading and pioneering Kingdomcity right around the globe, and the inspiration that you are to many who have stepped into church planting shoes and are kind of following all the Lord is inviting them to. So, Pastor Mark Varughese, we so appreciate the time that you've spent with us today on the podcast.
I really appreciate it, Charlie. Thank you for the privilege.